Welcome to Love Thy Lawyer, where we talk with attorneys and judges about their lives and careers in the legal profession. I'm Louis Goodman. Today, I have the privilege of speaking with the Honorable JoLynne Lee of the Alameda County Superior Court. Judge Lee worked as an assistant district attorney in the famed Bronx courthouse in New York. She's prosecuted as an assistant United States attorney in San Francisco and handled numerous matters of civil litigation in private practice. Serving as a neutral before her elevation to the bench, Judge Lee served as a special master and discovery referee. As the first Asian American female judge appointed in Alameda County, Judge Lee has presided over both civil and criminal matters. She has recently returned from 3 months as a visiting fellow at Oxford University in England. Judge JoLynne Lee, welcome to Love Thy Lawyer.
Glad to be here. Happy to see you.
It's good to see you, too. Where are you speaking to us from right now?
I'm actually speaking from home, from Alameda.
Where are you from originally?
Well, I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, but at a very young age, my family moved to New York City, Manhattan in particular. So I grew up in the Lower East Side of Manhattan.
Is that where you went to high school?
I went to high school at the High School of Music and Art, which is a specialized, school in New York that was up at that time. It's now in Lincoln Center, but at that time was up almost by the edge of Harlem, up by City College.
So did you play an instrument?
I didn't. I was actually, the school was, half of it were musical, music students. The other half were art students, visual arts. So I was a visual arts student. Some people did both. I just did the visual arts portion of it.
And when you say visual arts, could you be a little more specific?
Yeah. So, painting, printing. At your senior year, what happened would be is that part of the day you would be in basically in art classes. So art history or workshops, everybody had to take, basic, oil painting, watercolor, printmaking, and so forth. And then in the final year, you would specialize, and I specialized in printmaking. So I was doing printmaking at that point. And then the other half of the day, it was academic subjects. It was very interesting. It was fun.
It sounds like an incredible education.
It was. I think it was probably one of the best education I had. It was really amazing, actually.
Now, when you graduated from high school, where'd you go to college?
Well, I started out at Michigan State for just a year, and then I transferred to the City University, Brooklyn College, City University of New York. So I graduated there with political science at the end of the day. I was originally interested in urban planning, which is why I went to Michigan State, which had a specialty there. And then I ended up at Brooklyn and became a political science major. And then after that, I went to Columbia University in New York for law school.
Did you take any time off between the time you graduated from college and the time you went to Columbia, or did you go straight through?
1 year I took off. I was working for the Port of New York Authority. I was called a junior administrative assistant, which was an interesting job. And the most interesting thing I remember about that job was that, and at that time, this is before computers were used by everybody. I remember an older woman at the office telling me that I should never volunteer to type for anybody, because otherwise you would be kept in this sort of being somebody's secretary, right? So it was like really good advice sort of for women at the time. Said, and of course later on everybody types, right? Now everybody just types. If you don't type, you're in trouble. So.
I was talking to a young woman who is just going into high school, and I asked her if they have typing classes. And she said, no, we don't have typing classes because everybody basically knows how to type anyway.
Exactly. I mean, at 5 years old, they're typing, right? So, But so Quirrell has changed quite a bit since then, and that's for sure.
When did you first start thinking about being a lawyer? When did it occur to you that law was your profession?
Well, I after college, after I graduated, I was still interested in urban planning. And I thought that law school would be a place to, learn about zoning, for instance, real estate, et cetera. And that I wasn't really interested in actually practicing law so much as perhaps utilizing, the law in the urban, urban practice. So, city planning and so forth. So that's how it started out. But once I got into law school, I ended up getting interested in litigation and really totally not involved in urban planning at all.
So when you graduated from law school, what did you first start doing?
I was a deputy district attorney. They called it in New York assistant district attorney in Bronx County. I had worked for them the summer before, so I just ended up with them, afterwards.
I have to ask you if you've read one of my absolute favorite books, Bonfire of the Vanities.
Yeah. Well, I haven't read it, but it is, I think, as I recall, I recall reading some excerpts from it, and it's actually quite an accurate description for what I read of what the Bronx District Attorney's Office was like at the time. And I think in the forward, I think he thanks a particular assistant DA there, Ed, I'm trying to remember his last name, but who I knew very well at the DA's office. Yeah.
So you started out in the Bronx County District Attorney's Office. Now you are a Superior Court judge in Alameda County, California. Yeah. Can you briefly take us through your career so that we can see what that path was like for you?
Yeah, so I started, as I said, out in the DA's office. At one point as I was in that career, I decided that I wanted to move out of New York City. So it had this sort of revelation where I was standing on the subway tracks. I was living in the Upper West Side at the time, and I was, sitting waiting for my train to go take me to the Bronx, South Bronx, and there were like 4 tracks, and I don't know if you've ever been to New York City or in a subway station there, but it can be very noisy. And when there's
I lived on the Upper West Side for a while.
So when there's 4 tracks, it could be that all 4 trains are right, and that what was happening. And it was so noisy and so disturbing. I said, I have to get out of here. I need to get out of New York City. And so I started looking for a job, and I sent out resumes, and one of them was to the National Center for State Courts. I got a very polite letter back saying, really appreciate your applying. And it was for a job, I think, in Colorado. But we really don't have anything for you. We'll keep you in our file cabinet. So I thought, fine. I never expected to hear from them again, but I did, like 6 months later, offering me a job out in San Francisco. So it was, they actually did look back in their files for old resumes, and got interviewed by a good gentleman who was the head of the National Center for State Court San Francisco office, that I ended up going out and working for them. Yeah, I was on a very specific 18-month project to study court delay around the country. And so we went to state courts. We're about, I'd say, 25 state courts that we went to. We split up our team and went to different courts and collected data, spoke to judges and lawyers and so forth, and did a report on court delay, which was actually interesting because later on, as I understand it, it was used really pretty much to advocate for direct calendars, because we compared it, to federal courts, and understood that, the direct calendars really made cases go faster. It was, you get less delay. So that's really where it started. And that's how I got to California.
Well, speaking of federal courts, you served as an assistant United States attorney for a period of time. And what was that like? And how did that compare with being an assistant district attorney in state court?
Yeah, well, it's quite different, but also it's California and New York are very different in terms of their state court systems. For instance, in New York City, in order to charge a felony, you must indict and you must go before the grand jury. So a grand jury, you can't get a felony indictment until there's a grand jury hearing, which is very different here. We have preliminary hearings, right? Nothing like that. So it's really quite different. And the experience is quite different, of course, and being in federal court. And I was at pretty much most of the time in San Jose, which at that time was a very small courthouse run out of, they didn't have their big courthouse yet up there at that time. They were still building it. And I was before Judge Ingram a lot. I don't know if you knew him, but he was a wonderful judge to be before. So I spent a lot of time in front of him, and it was a great experience. I enjoyed it.
You also have had some experience as a civil attorney.
Yeah. So I left criminal work, most particularly litigation, because I had a young daughter. I had a baby, and I decided that I couldn't do, I really needed more control over my calendar. I couldn't, when you're in trial, it's 24/7, right? So at that point, I decided to go into civil practice, and I ended up with a a very nice, a good insurance defense firm actually down in San Jose at that time. So that was I made my last trial before Judge Ingram, before I left the U.S. Attorney's Office. I think it was like the day before I gave birth, So that was an interesting experience. And I decided I just couldn't continue to do that. And interestingly enough, I ended up staying out for like a year. And when I did that, I wasn't planning on doing that. I mean, they didn't have any like time off that you could take at that time after having a baby. You just either stayed or you didn't. You didn't stay with the office, either you quit. But I don't know why. I think I was reading something. I came from Columbia University, and at the time it was a dean who was a female dean, and they gave a little bit of her background. And one of the things she said was, one of the things that I realized happened is she had been out of the business of law for something, for several years for various reasons, and then came back and did very well. So I realized, well, if she could be out that long period of time, I could take off for a year and it won't be an issue, So I took off the year and then I came back. When I came back, that's when I started into the civil practice.
What prompted you to start thinking about a judicial career?
So I didn't actually ever consider becoming a judge, but I had a very good friend. And when I was a neutral, I had a very good friend who was on the Jenny Commission. And at the time she said, I really think you might consider putting in an application. I think, you would be a good fit right now and it'd be a good time for you to do it if you're interested. So I said, well, why not? So I did. That's really actually, that was it. And I didn't have any particular, it was kind of, this would be an interesting thing to do. It actually turned out to be the process itself was a great process. So I never regretted the process. And as I said, even if I don't get this position, the process was, it was so supportive that I was happy to have done it irrespective, because I had to reach out, to folks I hadn't, spoken to probably in a decade or so or more, because you have to, identify all the people you worked with in the past and judges and lawyers and so forth. And so I did that. And it was just like I got so tremendous sort of positive support from people that it was a really excellent experience for me. So that's how it happened. It was just somebody suggested and I said, why not?
What is it about practicing law, being a judge, being involved in the law that you really like?
You know what? I really like being a judge. I think it's like the best job in the world. And I think it's because it's a challenge every day. And you never know what to expect. So particularly if it doesn't matter even if you're doing asbestos cases all day, or if you're doing like you are in a civil direct, could be doing anything from an auto case, rear ender to medical malpractice, right? Or, some other esoteric areas of specialized areas of law. So you learn a lot. And it's a real incredible challenge. So I really enjoy it. I think that's the best part of it.
If a young person were coming out of college thinking about a career, would you recommend the law?
Oh, yes, I think so. I don't think it's for everybody, but if somebody was at least asking, that means that they have some interest. It's not, I take it's not like TV. I mean, I would say, I don't actually have a TV, so I have no idea in many ways what they have on TV these days, but it's certainly not like the old TV, screens. There's certain people, who and I've met them, quite a few in the law, who as a child, just they know that they want to become a lawyer. And not only that, they want to be a courtroom lawyer. They want to be a litigator. And there's a few people like that. But I think a lot of people go into law school, at least they did when I was going to law school, because they really didn't know what else to do. They didn't know it kept their options open, which is true. And you can do a lot of things with the law besides being a lawyer. So if I would say that it's great training, even if you decided, and I have many good friends who didn't actually practice law, but the law degree was very helpful in their careers.
How is being involved in the legal system, practicing law, or for that matter, being a judge, how is that either met or different from your expectations about it?
I don't think I really appreciated how much work there is behind the scenes, and how much judges, how hard they have to work. It's a very hard job, particularly nowadays. So I don't think I appreciated that when I applied for the job. But I like for those of us who like the idea of being a neutral, and like hearing both sides and not necessarily advocating for one side or the other. It's a very rewarding experience.
What did you think of sitting in criminal departments?
Oh, I enjoyed criminal departments. I think most of us do. I mean, that is a place where every day you have no idea what's going to happen, right? I mean, you can't make it up. You cannot make up what happens in court. Some of the stories that you hear, or the events. It's just so it's really interesting. And the lawyers are all very good. The lawyers you see in criminal court are used to being in court. They're very good litigators for the most part, in comparison to civil lawyers who never get to court, who don't have that sort of comfort level, that don't know the evidence that well. So I think I enjoyed criminal court.
It's kind of a two-part question, but what can lawyers do to be better prepared in general for going to court? And then what sort of things do you look for in an attorney that comes in front of you?
I think, and this is probably true for both criminal and civil, more so I think on the civil side, is really knowing your case and the facts. So, you may be a young associate and just kind of given the file and thrown into there, but you really have to be able to at least convince the judge that you actually really know the file. You really know what the case is about and can answer questions. So I think that's, for us as judges, we're looking for that. If somebody really, it's clear that they just have no clue what's going on in this case, don't really know the client and so forth, it's a problem for us. And so I think that's the difference. And I don't know what that means in terms of real life for a lot of lawyers. Because as I said, I was an insurance defense attorney. There are many times when your senior partner at the time, if you're a young associate, isn't really available for you. They're in trial and so forth. And so, you don't have a real understanding of where they're, because I think most of the trial attorneys, the ones who actually end up trying cases and they get the file fairly early on, have a pretty good idea of what their strategy is going to be. They have a pretty good idea where they want to go with the case. But if it's not conveyed to the younger, associates, then it's a problem when they're, when the young associate's given, discovery to do and take a deposition or do whatever it might be. It can be an issue, or have to appear in court at a case management conference and, what's going on in this case? Where are we going with it? Where's the issues? So I think I would say that's it. I just lately been thinking that I'm not seeing enough of younger attorneys being appropriately supervised and given direction from the person who's actually going to be at trial, right? And the person who really knows. And I think I know the really good trial lawyers pretty quickly size up a case, at the very beginning. They have an idea where they're going with it,
Another two-part question. What do you think's the best advice you've ever received? And what advice would you give to a young attorney just starting out?
I think one of the best advices that was given to me was if you're in court, is to make friends with the court clerk. It is really, really important. Know who your court clerk is and become friends with that court clerk, because you'll be amazed how much gets back to the judge about attorneys' behaviors or conduct, or what they, how they're, or whether the clerk likes them or doesn't. Makes a huge difference. I would say that was the best advice I think I was given.
And is that the advice that you would give to a young attorney as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think anybody coming to court, new attorney coming into court, is going to be a litigator. I'd say, yeah, that's what you want to do. You want to make friends with the court staff, the clerk, the court reporter, so forth, because they can do a lot for you or not. And you'll never know it one way or the other,
Do you think the legal system is fair?
Yes. I actually think it is for the most part. I also think that as much as jury trials are, criticized, certainly overseas a lot, they don't do many there. I actually think most jurors get it right. I mean, every now and then it's wrong, but for the most part, I think the jurors get it right. And it's amazing because they have to make decisions very quickly, and in an area that's totally foreign to them, and deal with laws that they're now being instructed on that they'd never heard before, that they have to learn to digest and understand. And they do it pretty well, I think, considering. So there's a lot of criticism. But, for the most part, I think that the jurors come out right.
I'd like to shift gears here a little bit. What is your family life like, and how has practicing law affected that, fit into it, practice of law fit into your family life?
My children are all adults, and I have like 4 grandchildren, right? So for me, it's fine. I mean, the thing about it, about being a judge, I think, is that for whether you're male or female, it is very time consuming. It is really kind of 24/7, depending on your assignment. It can be really 24/7. And so you really have to carve out that time, but that's true of being a lawyer, as a litigator. A lot of it is 24/7, right? Particularly when you're in trial. And so you just have to really be conscious of carving out that time for your family and for your children and your kids and grandchildren or whomever it might be.
When you are off the bench, what sort of things do you like to do recreationally? What do you like to do with some of that vacation time that you have?
For a while, I was very involved in doing jewelry work, and then I haven't done that in a while, and then I started doing some artwork. So I do have these sort of obligations. I have 4 grandchildren, so I started writing books for them, and I do like these Christmas letters, Santa letters for them every year, which are illustrated as well as written. So that does take some time. So I sort of spend my time doing that. I'm back to like the high school days, right? Doing artwork.
You've also been very involved with community service through Rotary, and you've also been on the Restoration Advisory Board of the Alameda Naval Air Station.
Yep.
I'm wondering if you just talk a little bit about that work.
Yeah. So, but before I was a judge, I was more heavily involved in Rotary, and I was with the YWCA. I was on their board of directors, and I was a co-chair of the Alameda Restoration Advisory Board, which was a Navy, it's a legislative command that required that when various naval shipyards were decommissioned and being put back into civilian use, there's this tremendous amount of environmental cleanup. Alameda Naval Air Station, which was the former Naval Air Station, was a Superfund site. It probably still is to some extent. So they required the community to get involved in the cleanup, and I was doing that, and that was extremely interesting. And the Navy, I must say, was at that time really excellent partners in that regard.
Let's say you came into some real money, $3 or $4 billion.
I wouldn't know what to do with it, to be honest with you.
Well, what would you do differently in your life, do you think?
Yeah, so I probably would buy a place in England, second place. But other than that, I would say, you want to put away money for your grandchildren and so forth. But if you have billions of dollars, there's a lot of money left, right? So then you want to think about what you can do for in that regard, what you could really do for the community, right? So I would probably think along those lines, like, is there a scholarship that I want to, support, create, something of that nature? Yeah, that's what I think.
Let's say you had a magic wand. There was one thing in the world, legal world or otherwise, that you could change. What would that be?
Oh, a magic wand. You mean like physical things or just anything?
Well, really anything.
I tell you what, I'm really disturbed about 2 things. One is I really think that the climate change is the biggest issue that we have, period. And it will impact economics. It will impact social situation. It will impact governance and so forth. And I think that's big. I don't know what one could do about that, but if I were to have a magic wand, it would be to, resolve that. The other major thing is, which I think is in part because of the economics, everything I think ends up being some kind of economic issue, is I am really concerned about the disparity in the gap between the haves and have-nots worldwide, but particularly, what we're familiar with the U.S. I'm not as familiar with outside, but I think it's true not just in the U.S. I think it's true worldwide. And that is something I just think that we could work on. And I don't, there's a lot of, for instance, I don't think it's necessary for everybody to graduate college. I think there's alternatives that we could be looking into that would give people, reasonable income And every school shouldn't be a good school. I mean, it doesn't matter where even if you're living in a poverty-stricken area, you should have a good school. There's no reason not to have a good school just because, it happens to be a low-income area. This doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand that. I just don't understand that. And that would be my magic wand.
Is there anything that you want to talk about that we haven't discussed?
No. I love the questions, by the way. So, I think you covered a pretty broad area. Now, there's nothing that I can think of that I would, want to talk about that we haven't really discussed at this point. Appreciate it.
Judge JoLynne Lee, thank you so much for joining me today on the Love Thy Lawyer podcast. As always, it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, and appreciate your inviting me onto the podcast. So thank you very much.
That's it for today's episode of Love Thy Lawyer. If you enjoyed listening, please share it with a friend and follow the podcast. If you have comments or suggestions, send me an email. Take a look at our website at lovethylawyer.com, where you can find all of our episodes, transcripts, photographs, and information. Thanks to my guests, and to Joel Katz for music, Brian Matheson for technical support, Paul Roberts for social media, and Tracy Harvey. I'm Louis Goodman.
That's a really good question. I have to think about that. Yeah, I can't. I don't think I could answer. I just don't. I don't know what I would say. I have to think a lot about that one. That's really a great question, by the way.